I'm very glad to be here and to be able to read to you tonight. I plan to read between 20 minutes, half an hour from this book that I'm still working on. Often people will tell you you shouldn't ever read aloud manuscripts that are still in progress, but it's a way for me to judge how it sounds and how it plays. The book is called The Sun Collective, and The Sun Collective is the name of a little sort of anarchist ecological group in Minneapolis. And in certain ways, the novel is about what people who are engaged in trying to solve social problems are doing or are willing to do when most of the ideologies that they have depended on no longer seem to be working. And it's as if they're trying to invent new forms of revolution from scratch. The passage I'm going to read to you, the opening passage, takes place on the light rail in Minneapolis. The light rail goes from downtown Minneapolis out to the airport, where I was this morning, and the Mall of America, the largest mall in the lower 48 states. It also might be a point of interest that some years ago, Al-Qaeda named the Mall of America as the #1 target, which when I first heard about this, I thought, that's comical. And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, I can sort of see why they might think that way. Anyway, Jim mentioned a relative stranger. I like to bring strangers together at the beginnings of stories because the characters don't know any more about each other than the reader does. You don't have to go into a lot of history. And you'll see that that's what is about to happen. So this is the very opening of the novel. Soon after he boarded the light rail at the downtown station, Bredigan checked the available space, saw 2 empty seats next to each other at the far end of the car, and aimed himself in their direction as the doors chimed shut. Having taken the one on the aisle, he removed his Minnesota Twins baseball cap and placed it next to him so that nobody would drop down there. An odd, soapy purple light, the translucent advertising sheath attached to the outside of the car was filtering the sun, gave his hands a bruised discoloration as if he had been in a fistfight. A young couple followed him onto the train and sat down in the seats opposite his own. A man of retirement age, Bredigan wore an expression of studied neutrality whenever he found himself in public, as if he possessed important secret information and needed to fade into the background to avoid exposure. Despite his age, he still had a full head of graying hair, rather bushy eyebrows, and penetrating blue eyes. Deep lines creased his face. Though he wore khakis and a cotton sports shirt, giving an appearance of informality, he sat straight as a child who had recently been told not to slouch, and he gazed out the window with the uneasy intelligence of someone who has few illusions to comfort him. Last week on this commuter train, there had been an incident. A woman whose baby was in a stroller had pitched her and rolled her way to the seat directly in front of him. Bredigan had been close to the window, near enough to hear her panting. From time to time, she uttered soft groans. Every few seconds, she would nod and say, "Uh-huh," as if in conversation with a ghost companion. When an old man had walked past and leaned down to pat her stroller-bound infant on the head, the woman had started to shout, "Don't you touch my baby," she said, pointing at the aging passenger who, alarmed, hurried out the doors at the train's next stop. Then she had glared at Bredigan, still sitting there behind her, as if he too were guilty of public touching. Collecting himself, Bredigan had pretended to stare at the landscape outside. Where he looked apparently didn't make any difference. "Nobody touches my baby," she cried out suddenly in his direction. She smelled of wine. The whole car smelled of wine and Red Bull. But this morning, the train had apparently been steam cleaned, and the usual professional managerial types, suited, accessorized, and iPhoned, were seated nearby, tapping out messages, talking into their Bluetooths, or reading the Wall Street Journal. Very few victims of capitalism were on the train today. Most people thought of them as the homeless, or as vagrants, or the deinstitutionalized mad. One of Bredigan's friends preferred to call them scum, but for Bredigan, they were the V of C's, that generously proportioned sector of the economy that had never had a single foothold on the ladder of success and who were lying on the ground anywhere they could fall unmolested. In midsummer, you'd find them on the train rumbling out to the Mall of America, a terminal point where they would not disembark, but stay right where they were, collapsed in heaps, half asleep and therefore semi-alert, until the train started up and returned to downtown Minneapolis. They had no purchases. They consumed nothing but air and food scraps. Even the tattered clothes they wore seemed borrowed from somewhere. Back and forth, the trains would go, carrying their half-awake human freight. Whenever Bredigan exchanged glances with one of these people, he tried to make his face express compassion and kindliness. They looked back at him with sodden indifference or hatred. Every so often, one of the victims of capitalism, awakened and weighed down with God, would start to shout inspired prophecy. "Look at my wounds," somebody had loudly commanded him last week, though without specifying any location. And then, "Where's Duluth?" Now the train passed by several abandoned grain elevators as blindingly white as the abstract geometries of a Charles Sheeler painting. And at 38th Street, a well-tailored gentleman boarded, wearing a three-piece suit, a trench coat, and a trilby hat. He trailed a small suitcase on wheels. His glasses consisted of small tinted circles on thin gold frames, and some property in the lenses reflected light in such a way as to make his eyes nearly invisible. Standing in the aisle next to Bredigan, bathed in soapy blue sunshine, he looked down, smiled, and asked if the seat next to Bredigan's, the one on which Bredigan's baseball cap lay, was taken. No, Bredigan said, picking up his cap, putting it on and moving over. "Please, sit down." The man dropped down in slow motion next to Bredigan, lifting the crease of his trousers in an old-fashioned gesture. "Thank you kindly," the man said. He had a trace of a southern accent. A few moments passed. The man cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said, looking straight ahead before checking his watch. "You have a plane to catch?" Bredigan asked, making a social effort. "Yes, you could say that," the man said. "Well, where to?" Bredigan asked, trying to keep his questions on this side of politeness, the starchy affability one attempts with strangers. Paris, the man said. I'm going to a conference. Ah, Bredigan said. And you, the man said. Where might you be going? He turned to glance at Bredigan, but behind the lenses, the man's eyes remained invisible. Maybe he didn't have eyes. Maybe he had something else. Oh, me, Bredigan said, I'm headed out to the mall to get some exercise. I'll meet with some friends out there, and then we'll walk around until we tire. It's air-conditioned. And although I don't particularly care for it, yes, the man said, agreeably interrupting him. I've seen them, or I should say, I've seen walking around people like you. But tell me, why don't you walk around the lakes in the city or the parks? Outdoors. I myself enjoy the city parks this time of year. Birds and, the man thought for a moment, trees. The stranger was wearing cologne, Bredigan noticed. The scent was like autumn, aromatic burnt leaves, and the man's accent faded in and out as if he were imitating a Southerner without being one himself. Well, I have a medical condition, Bredigan said, so I need to stay out of high temperatures, and therefore I go to the mall, the man said, interrupting again. Yes, who was this character, prying into his early morning life and finishing his sentences for him? So, Bredigan said, trying to take control of the situation, if you don't mind my asking, what conference are you going to? Rather quickly, and as if by magic, the man reached into his pocket and drew out a business card before handing it to Bredigan. Dr. Arver Jefferson, MD, psychoanalytic and associated therapies, member, Midwest Institute of Proton Analytics. The doctor's email address and phone numbers had been printed at the bottom of the card, but the ink was smudged and mostly illegible. I've never heard of proton analytics, Bredigan said, putting the card into his shirt pocket. What is it? The doctor drew in a long breath. I'll give you an example. You see that man over there? He asked, nodding in the direction of the young couple who had followed Bredigan onto the train. The man wore headphones over his ears, and a stack of pamphlets was in his lap. The woman seemed to be studying both Bredigan and the doctor. Yes, the doctor said, that one. As soon as I get off this train, he will ask you for money. He'll test you. He will beg you for something, anything. You must give him $1 at least. Do you know the legend of Notre Seigneur en pauvre, our Lord in rags? Bredigan shook his head. It's a French-Canadian legend of Jesus, the doctor said, warming to his subject. And in this legend, Jesus is dressed as a beggar and is roaming the earth, testing the generosity of everyone he meets. It is a spot quiz for your salvation. You could think of that man over there as Jesus. I recommend that you do so. Did you say that you have a medical condition? Bredigan nodded. The airport is coming up soon, and I will have to be on my way, the doctor informed Bredigan. But I will tell you another legend that grew up among my people in the South. This one will help you, I guarantee. It will help you personally. Here is what you must do. This is a cure for affliction. The doctor now seemed nervously energized and was enunciating his words with care, as if he were speaking to a child. Find a mirror the largest one you can easily carry, let's say a hand mirror, and take that mirror to a creek, or better yet, a flowing stream, or best of all, a river. And here is what you must do. You must lower the mirror into the water. As he spoke, the doctor's hands moved in the air in front of him, pantomiming, or so it seemed to Bredigan, a vigorous form of washing. The water has to flow over the mirror or the cure won't work. And once you have the water streaming over the glass, you wash your reflected face in the mirror, not your actual face, but your mirrored face, your reflected face, your face in the mirror, and you will get well. You will recover, and renewed, you will prosper. I give you my personal guarantee. Really, I promise you, you will get better. This is an ancient cure. It is proven. It is so. There is literature to this effect. This little recital sounded like nonsense to Bredigan, but even nonsense can serve a purpose when you don't feel like yourself. The train entered a long tunnel, and the sudden change in air pressure caused his eardrums to pop as soon as he swallowed. He saw his own reflection in the window and was startled. Across the aisle, the half-sleeping young man wearing headphones sat up and rubbed his face. In his lap, the collection of pamphlets appeared to levitate, thanks to the altered air pressure. Next to the young man, the woman, evidently his girlfriend, gazed fixedly at the passing landscape before taking out her phone and tapping a message into it. I must go now, the doctor said, standing up and gazing at Bredigan one last time. His opaque lenses gave the doctor the appearance of a walking oracle. Enjoy your walk and do as I say. You will get better. I guarantee you will be saved. He turned toward Bredigan, and the lenses of his glasses reflected the sun. Perhaps you will see me again, and you can tell me how you got well. The doors of the train opened, accompanied by a two-note electronic chime, and the doctor hurried out, pulling his suitcase and checking his watch. And as he exited, Bredigan thought he heard the doctor say, "You never told me your name." But he might have imagined those words tossed into the air behind the Trilby hat in the general tumult of passengers rushing out toward the terminal where the TSA would soon examine them for concealed weapons and malevolent intent. Now, the light rail was mostly empty. Bredigan counted only a dozen or so passengers, including the young man and woman still sitting across the aisle from him, the man who the doctor had predicted would soon ask him for money. In preparation for this request, Bredigan reached into his wallet and opened it, taking out a dollar bill, which he folded into his palm. The young man watched him do so, although without interest, and then went back to straightening his pile of papers. As the train erupted from the tunnel into the sunlight, Bredigan waited to be asked for money, to be put to the test, to be saved by Notre Seigneur, en pauvre. But the young man, now examining his iPhone, had turned his head away to observe the landscape of hotels and businesses passing by. And Bredigan, clutching his dollar bill, realized that he wouldn't be tested today, nor would he be saved. The couple sitting across from him on the aisle are members of the Sun Collective, and they're going out there to drop pamphlets, that old-fashioned thing, at the Mall of America, which of course you can't do. You know, it's quite illegal. You can't stage a protest at the Mall of America. You can't leave pamphlets out there. I've learned a lot about the Mall of America since I started writing this. They even have a jail underground there. And I'm going to conclude the reading part of this, I'm going to jump ahead 40 pages to a section in which Bredigan has taken his wife, Alma, to Minnehaha Park in Minneapolis. There's a falls there at Minnehaha Park, and then the creek that runs down and eventually empties in the Mississippi River. They've gone there, they've gone to Minnehaha Park for a picnic, and as they've been sitting there, they've looked up and there's a hot air balloon going over with the face of a bearded man on the side of it. And Bredigan and Alma start to wonder what it is. And Bredigan says, Jesus, that's who it is. And Alma says, that's not Jesus. That's the man on those cigarette papers, the ones you used to roll joints with. Remember that guy? I can't think of the brand. It's been too long. Zig Zag, Bredigan said loudly, gazing at the hot air balloon now drifting away in a northerly direction. Zig Zag cigarette papers. What's a hot air balloon doing here? We're close to the airport. That has to be illegal. No, she nodded. It's a good illegal omen, don't you think, that balloon? Come on. She led him down the remaining steps, and they stood watching the falls for a few minutes before they turned and, without speaking, advanced down the pathway along the creek. Behind them and then on each side, the birds cried and sang as if they were announcing some important breaking news, some wonderful or terrible event that was about to happen in bird bulletins. Overhead, the illegal hot air balloon advertising zigzag papers, having drifted away, the trees on either side of Minnehaha Creek formed a canopy that produced a shade so thick that Bredigan seemed to see dots of shadow wherever he looked. The air down here was cool and windless. Alongside Bredigan and his wife, the flowing water chuckled, and the air had a super-saturated vegetative aroma with something angry and sour in it, like the oxygen in a locker room after a losing game. A sparrow hopped from maple tree to blighted cedar, following them, it seemed, with interest. From a great distance came a low, thundering sound, the roar of an airplane clearing its throat, and the air moved, though not with wind, as the branches of the neighboring maples and poplars began to gesticulate in their direction, some kind of sign language, Bredigan suddenly thought, first wondering what was being communicated, and then wondering why he thought anything could be. Alma turned to her left, took her hand from his, and bending down, riffled her fingers in the creek water. It's not that cold, she said, before standing up and retaking his left hand in hers, the water from the creek and now from her hand wetting his fingers. They walked past a few other couples and some scattered children toward a slight leftward bend in the creek, where a gap in the trees produced a thick rivulet of vertical sunlight. And after advancing into it, they were alone, standing in the brilliance produced by the absence above them both. Alma knelt, putting both hands in the flowing water, and Bredigan knelt down beside her. From his shirt pocket, he removed a small hand mirror. "What's that?" she said, nodding at it. The question directed not so much at the mirror's existence as at its function. "You brought a mirror?" "Take a look," Bredigan said. Lowering the glass into the creek's flowing water, he angled it so that he saw her face reflected, darkened and tinted by the moving current, which at first altered her expression so that she seemed to smile and then produced a shimmering outline to her face, as if what he saw there had entered a time tunnel, a wormhole extending to the shadow side of an alternative universe where a previous Alma lived, no longer his wife, but instead a once anonymous beauty in blue jeans and penny loafers, whom he had met decades ago at a college mixer in the university's student union, when he had walked up to her and said, "Want to dance?" extending his hand as the bad local band had lurched into the opening chords of Wild Horses. She had nodded gamely before they had nervously and urgently strolled to the middle of the room where, in the obscurity produced by the other dancers, they would not be noticed. Instead of lurching around to the song's shuffling, lust-drugged rhythm, the anonymous girl who she then was had unexpectedly fallen into his arms, reaching around him in a clutching embrace as if she had known him all her life, or somehow understood that she would know him for the rest of it, as was true now and would be forever. It was her face from that dance that he saw gazing back at him from the hand mirror that he had lowered into the flowing water of Minnehaha Creek, and now with his sun hat fixed to the top of his head to protect his skin from the ultraviolet rays that inspired squamous cell cancers that were probably already there, he drew his hand across the image of her 19-year-old face, touching the image, caressing it, and washing it. And as she looked at him from the puzzled distance of 40 years ago, and she smiled uncertainly, not exactly wanting to be a girl again. Not now, not ever. Please stop. No. She didn't want to be back there, her eyes said. She had been there. She had been young once, and now she wanted their precious daily lives unaltered. This trick, this magic had something decidedly terrible in it. The fountain of youth flowed in only one direction toward you, and with poison. You had to drink the poison to make it work, and as it did its work, it erased you. "What are you doing?" she cried out. Bredigan turned to see Alma closing her eyes and then shaking her head to clear her thoughts. The age lines in her cheeks reinstated, the age spots on her hands reappearing as soon as she looked down at them, and as the music from the bad local band playing Wild Horses faded away. Turning her head slowly toward him, she said, "Something is wrong," as she tried to stand up. In the static, humming silence, the song of the birds intruded, the show they had quieted themselves to watch being over. "What is it?" he said. "I don't feel well," she said. She tilted toward him. "Oh, Harry," she said. She raised her left arm up around his neck, and she slurred, "Mister, do you love me?" After 35 years of marriage, she had forgotten his name. I'm going to stop there, but I should tell you it's all right. She's going to be all right. She really is going to be all right. She has, after this episode, she acquires some powers that she didn't have before. But I won't tell you what they are. You just have to read the book when it comes out. Thank you for...